Hey there, TTRPG players. Today we're going to be talking about railroading and consequences and how these are two different things, but both are GM techniques. So, with railroading, it often gets a very bad rap. People have been dealing with the harsher side of it, and that's why it gets a lot of pushback. So when people hear the word, they immediately have a knee-jerk reaction. Railroading is when a GM will take the story and try to push it back on track, right? It could be very forceful, it could be gentle, it really is up to how the GM goes about it. Of course, there is good and bad for it. Typically, whenever we play these TTRPGs, we are under the impression that every single thing that the players can do will just be very organic. The players will go out there, they can make the story for themselves, they will play along. Not really. Typically, whenever you're having like a very open sandbox game, yes, you can. You can have the players go do whatever they want. When you're telling a very story-centric game, then a little bit of railroading is often included in the GMing style because you have to try to get the players back into the path. Now, there's good ways to go about it and bad. A GM could say, no, I'm not letting you go to that other town. We agreed on this other story. This is what's happening. That's a bad version of railroading, right? The players wanted to go do something in another town. Let's say they wanted to go buy some magical weapons, and the GM just said, no, you have to do the investigation here first. And so now the players feel trapped. They don't feel like they really had much of an option. Now, there could be a gentler way of going about this, whereas the GM could say, well, unfortunately, the gate's closed right now due to repairs, or there's something going on right now that is blocking the way. Maybe there's a terrible storm that is happening. Your players can't go over to the next place, so you might as well finish that investigation. That is a gentler way of doing the railroading, tying in with the story, tying in with the world building, and allowing the players to think, okay, well, we can still go do our thing when we're done, but right now we might as well get this thing done. And that's sort of like an easy way to guide it. Still, some people really push back against this because they don't like that idea, right? But once again, when you're telling a very story-centric game, you do need to have ways to put the players back into the story, whether it is some sort of motivation, whether it is a blocker, something like that. Now, consequences. When people hear consequences, they often think that it is the same thing as railroading because they're like, this is forcing my hand. This is making something happen to me as a player. Like, I can't make the decision that I wanted to do. It's different. So let's say your players were doing an investigation. There was a person going around just annihilating people around the town. Your players were in charge of investigating it, and you wanted to go over to the other town to buy magic weapons. So you said, we're not going to do it. And then GM went, okay. And then you went off to the next town to go do what you wanted. Well, you left a person in that town who's just annihilating people, so they start taking out more people. They start taking out important people or people connected to the players. Now the players say, that's not fair. You just twisted it, and now we're being forced back into the adventure. Not really. What happened was a consequence. The world keeps moving, the world keeps spinning. So when your players decide to go do something different, the world will still keep moving on. There is a consequence to your actions, but there can also be good consequences. If you took out the person who's annihilating everyone around town, you would get a reward, maybe a party, maybe people would congratulate and thank you, a parade, who knows, whatever the GM decides to give you. That is a good consequence for your actions. Consequences are things that happen when they are reflected or reacting to the player's actions. What they've done, what they're deciding to do, that's when a consequence comes in play. Railroading is when a GM sees the players starting to deviate from the path and either gently or forcefully puts them back onto the story path and then carries it forward. Consequences and railroading are both actually very good GM techniques if applied correctly, but of course they can be applied incorrectly, and that's what creates the friction with your players. If you are deciding to play a very story-centric or consequence-heavy world, make sure to talk about that in your session 0 so that people don't feel like they're getting caught left field. Hope this helps players understand in the GM mind space of consequences and railroading, why they're used, why they're kind of applied. If you have any questions about it, feel free to put it in the comments below and I will happily reach out to you. All right, bye for now.